on how to deal with data management plans. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I will go over some of the most important bits of information on data management plans, or DMPs for short, which you need to know to guide your researchers in successfully putting a first version of one DMP together. Now, today's topic, how to deal with data management plans, follows up really well with the topic of our last webinar on how to write a successful impact statement for an Horizon 2020 proposal. The reason why is because DMPs are closely linked to the way a project understands the way its planned activities and the data they use or generate will work to create impact during and after the project runtime. Our presentation today covers 4 main points. First, what is a data management plan? Where does the idea come from? Do I need one? And of course, the nuts and bolts, how to create the data management plan. Before I explore each one of these aspects in more detail, just a quick word regarding any questions you may have. Once the presentation is over, I will address all the questions that come up from you, but please don't feel like you have to wait until the end to ask your questions. Questions are very welcome at any time, but please make sure you join our chat room to send them our way. I will address them once we finish the presentation on the main points. So, and what concerns the main question, what is a data management plan? Well, there's no unique definition because it is a complex document. A DMP is a formal document detailing the type of data to be collected, processed, or generated by a project, and how this data will be shared and preserved. It is also a flexible tool to be used by project partners to define what data will be shared, how it will be shared and why, and also when. So it is a consortium-approved document. It assigns resources, identifies responsibilities, and any restrictions which may apply to the further use of this data. Now, a data management plan is also a key document that is mandatory for all Horizon 2020 projects taking part in the European Commission's Open Research Data Pilot. It is also, in this sense, a deliverable, but it is a special kind of deliverable because it is considered a living document, with the first version due by month 6 of project's runtime and a final version at the project end. Just a moment ago, I mentioned that the DMP is a mandatory requirement for all projects funded Horizon 2020. Well, I will, clarify this point a little bit. So let me explain. Open data is a key term in Horizon 2020, and there is a lot that falls under this concept. For the purpose of this webinar today, I will just talk a little bit more on how it relates to the creation and function of a DMP. Open research is directly related to the European Commission's current science policy, known as Open Science. And Open Science is all about making the way research gets done, and especially how its results get used, more accessible. It's all about open access, and the Open Research Data Pilot mentioned in all Horizon 2020 proposal templates refers specifically to data in all publicly funded EU research projects. The Commission does this because it is a worldwide best practice that helps to support the sharing of results of publicly funded research. It is also because doing so can have a positive influence on the economy and society. So when you are looking at the proposal template for Horizon 2020 actions, you might have been wondering what something like this paragraph in Part A means. If selected, applicants will by default participate in the pilot on open research data in Horizon 2020, which aims to improve and maximize access to and reuse of research data generated by actions. Or even Part 5 of the sentence in Section 3, implementation, which is the part marked in yellow here. If your project is taking part in the pilot on open research data, you must include a data management plan as a distinct variable. So you might be wondering, what exactly does this mean? Well, the open research data pilot was made compulsory for projects in all thematic areas funded under Horizon 2020 in 2017. Prior to this, only a certain number of thematic areas were covered. However, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, participating in the pilot should be viewed with a bit of flexibility. The reason why has to do with a motto developed by the Commission known as open as possible, as closed as necessary. This motto reflects the Commission understanding that not all data used in research is meant for public viewing. Therefore, even though it is the default now in Horizon 2020 that all projects take part in the pilot, the Commission also allows for opting out if doing this is the right thing for your project. There are a lot of reasons why a project may opt out. I will not cover them all now, but there are some main reasons that can be used by applicants, and these are reasons that the Commission recognizes and accepts. The first one is related with intellectual property rights. The second, well, it concerns the use of sensitive data. And you also have projects which don't actually create or use data, some coordination and support actions, for instance. You can learn about other reasons for opting out of this pilot by visiting the Horizon 2020 online manual, which explains the concept of open access and open research in more detail. Now, as an NCP, your job is to help translate all of this into the researchers in your community. That's why it's really important to always try to put yourself in the shoes of a researcher when thinking about proposals. I say this because this brings me to what is probably a question currently going through your mind. Do I need one? The simple answer to that question is yes. Even if you may think you don't need a data management plan, it may turn out that you do, which is why I now want to shift the focus away from the general background to the more specific things you need to be aware of when the time comes to actually write a data management plan. For the remainder of our time today, I will talk about the structure of the document as well as some specific tools, the nuts and bolts, so to say, that exist to help putting DMP together. To write a data management plan for Horizon 2020, the first place to start is the online manual at the Funding and Tenders Opportunities portal. And then you go there and you download the template the Commission has produced for this purpose. Read the document to familiarize yourself with what the Commission requires in the deliverable document. It is important to mention that although the Commission has made this template for the creation of a DMP, projects are not required to use it. It is, however, highly recommended, as you can imagine. There are multiple examples of DMPs online, and we will explore that in a bit, but there are also guidelines on how to create data management plans, and this is just an example. Now, if the Commission template isn't to your liking, another good source is a template offered by Zenodo and other platforms. We will also explore this in the end, so bear with me a bit more. The advantage of using the Commission's template comes from the fact that it also explains what the Commission expects to see. In this case, that would be a fair explanation of how data is managed in the project. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. This is open access and open science in a nutshell, And the template lists a series of questions broken down into different headings, which all DMPs need to answer. As you can see here in the template, this table, which is just the first part of the table, and it continues in the template, neatly summarizes what projects need to write about in their DMPs. Specifically, the DMP needs to explain the number of data sets in the project. Data sets are determined by work package and are tied to the different activities planned in each work package. Besides the data sets, the DMP also needs to explain the types of standards a project will use. How will the data be made findable? What kind of name or specific identification will be given for this purpose? Which partner is responsible for this data set? Where will the data ultimately be stored? These type of questions are the ones which need to be answered. Which reminds me about one thing I mentioned earlier. As I said, the DMP is a deliverable with the first version due by month 6. This first version does not have to provide an answer to every question listed in the template. In fact, it is perfectly acceptable that the first version just provides a description of the project, its objectives, expected impact, an explanation of data sets, the responsible partner, and what the purpose of the collection and use of the data will be. As a living document, the Commission expects for the data management plan to be updated as a project's management structure and specific practices evolve. One thing about DMP is that as a document, a plan, the idea is the same for all projects funded under Horizon 2020. But as you know, not all data is the same, which brings me to the final point. So what kind of data is relevant for Societal Challenge 6 projects? When I talk about data, of course, there are a lot of different types that come into question for the social sciences and humanities. For a DMP, what one can imagine to include would be data sets describing recordings, interview transcripts, surveys, archival findings, art and sculpture, including monuments, for instance. Once again, this is just a brief list of the type of data projects in social sciences and humanities. And of course, you would need to consider these aspects and different types of data when you are identifying and describing the data sets. When you are advising Societal Challenge 6 researchers, it is also important to keep in mind the nature of the research they do, since this can also have an influence on the creation of a data management plan. In particular, I am referring to the fact that research in our sector covers certain issues which may require extra consideration. Specifically, I'm talking about personal data and, of course, then the ethical issues that needs to be clearly explained and included in the data management plan. The research with sensitive topics such as those found in any of the current Work Programme 2020 calls, especially on migration or governance calls, topics on terrorism, radicalization, researching with sensitive populations such as young children, women, drug addicts, migrants, gender, application of the GDPR, or working also on security topics or other SSH integration or cross-cutting matters in a sensitive topic. So again, this is just an example of the type of issues researchers in our sector need to keep in mind when producing data management plan. And of course, these are issues which other disciplinary sectors may not have to deal with. Before I end this more expositive part of our conversation today, I just want to share with you a brief overview of the various several repository tools available for projects to make use for the storage of their data. These repositories are places to store the data sets produced during the lifetime of the project. And of course, there are different places that we can go and explore. And this is the part where I show you not only where you can store the data, but also places and projects that also allow you and guide you through the creation of a data management plan. So I'll start with OpenAir. One moment. And so in OpenAir, we know that we have guidance for different things. This is also a very relevant project promoting open science. And here you have a lot of things, and this is also the services. You can also find connection with other projects and other aspects. And in here you have, I highlight this OpenAir precisely because the guidance they provide in terms of data management plans. Starting the first steps, when to write and revise, and then they also provide more information. In here, you have also what they have as help desk, where you have frequently asked questions, but you can also ask a question yourself. And then, of course, there are a lot of training materials available, webinars, workshops, and of course communities of practice. Just going to show you Zenodo here because I don't think I included in my slides. So I was talking about the repositories for the data, and so Zenodo is probably one of the most widely known in terms of repository, free one. And of course you can easily connect here, and Zenodo is also linked with other projects such as OpenAir, for instance. So it is useful for you to get to know these tools so that you can present options to your clients. Now, if I move on, there's also the Foster project, and here they also provide you guidance not only on the concepts and how they are related in terms of dimension, and also, but in terms of, from a practical perspective, what is related with research data management. You have the plans, which is the specific topic that we're talking about today. But of course, related with this, we have the research data management policies, the services, some standards, and then data management tools. The things that researchers can use on a daily basis when they have to effectively manage their data. So this is also very, very useful. And here you can also find resources if you scroll down, and for instance, on the topic of open research and DMP presentations, you have different views, and you also have videos on the basics of research data management. Okay, and here I think we will probably appreciate this. There's a specific point about data protection and ethics. I will not go into detail on this topic, the relation between data management and ethics. That would be a different webinar, and we do not have the time today to cover all these aspects. And here, it's also very practical. It's probably one of the most, I would say, commonly suggested platforms to use to create a DMP, but there are others, there are several, which is the DMP online. And if you go here to public DMPs, we can, we can test one and check out how the resources relate to this, and how a data management plan in the end might look like. Okay, so here you have the data description, data set. You need to justify the scale of the volume in terms of scale of the data. And so you have here, and then there's the reference to the ethical and legal issues, reference to data sharing and openness. So here you also have to include this. And of course, well, that sums it up in terms of what we have to say to you today about data management plans. I hope you found this webinar at least helpful, and that you have managed to gather some basic information and useful basic information regarding the DMPs that will help you advise your researchers for the next call of Societal Challenge 6. So thank you for listening. I will now check if you have sent a question to us. I see that there are different people connected in the chat room, so I'm waiting for your questions. In the meantime, I would like, maybe because we have time until we wait for the questions, to develop a little bit more on the relation between your data management plan and ethics. I mentioned that, well, for Societal Challenge 6, and depending on the specific type of data being collected, you might need to include the ethics overview in terms of what's going to be the message in your data management plan. Well, it is useful. We all know that first of all, ethical issues sometimes get a little bit forgotten until the very end of the project, because people tend to see ethics issues as, you know, they need to fill in, they need to tick the box in the Part A table on ethics issues. But we all know that it is not like that, and it is now becoming more and more common that projects that going through the grant agreement preparation, they are asked to include work packages on ethics with specific deliverables and specific aspects in terms of guidance and clarification that they have to provide afterwards. Well, the key idea that I would like to stress, and it is useful for us to stress when we talk to potential applicants, is that it's easier if you have like a parallel track in terms of creating a data management plan, but also the ethics. The proposal evolves naturally, and it is easier if during, you know, the time that you take to prepare the proposal and think about the ideas and think about methodologies, you start making the questions in terms of, okay, what data am I going to collect or to create? Is this data sensitive? It is anonymous, or do I have to do something with this data? What does this imply? Do I have to create different levels of security? These are questions for which the answers need to be both in the data management plan, because they concern data, but also they need to be in the ethics part, because it has to do with ethics standards, and it has to do with the respect for GDPR. So when we're talking about research, let's say fundamental research on mathematics and physics, you know, compliance with GDPR is a bit lighter than when we're talking about, for instance, anthropological fieldwork in Mali or Nigeria or something like that. You're talking on a very complex scenario in terms of the data that you will be gathering, in terms of the population that you will be reaching, how they will be able to provide their consent, how you're going to gather the data, if you need to include sensitive data. So all of these aspects are necessarily included in a good data management plan, but they also need to be considered as an ethical component. So this means that these two aspects, they should walk and grow side by side. This is not a completely different task, a separate task. It is something that we need to stress this quite often. You need to do this in parallel to the proposal writing, and it gets easier if you do this way instead of leaving this for the last minute panic of the week before submitting the proposal. So that would be the main message. I don't know if there are questions. I think people are still very shy, maybe because it's a Friday or because we are getting closer and closer to Christmas, but people are very, very shy. So let me then just provide you an example of how a data management plan in a project that I've followed helped the researchers clarify certain ethical issues that were not identified as they should have been from the start. Because again, ethics often is reduced to the table on part A, and we need to take a different approach. So once they got to the impact part, and they were dealing with a sensitive population, they had to think about how they were going to store the data. This was a project that basically it was an anthropologist, and he was doing field work extensively in third countries. So the challenge regarding with data, and when he saw the demands in terms of what he had to clarify for the data management plan, he started taking notes, in the sense of, okay, we're going to gather this data, this will not be anonymous, but then it will be, we will, kind of codify the data so that we separate any data that identify the people from the notes and the data coming from the interviews, the raw data. And we will do this, and then we will establish different levels of access to all these details and these personal data and information, to avoid that one person gets to know everything about everyone. Good. So this for in terms of data management plan, he listed the what data. He replied to the questions of what data, why he needed to gather that data, why it was relevant, and how it was going to be gathered, how it was going to be secured, and also treated, and what would be his the project's policy in terms of making the data open in respect of the open science principles. So he submitted a draft version of this, of course, with some main aspects, and in his proposal there were in fact a reference to some ethics part, but mostly related with, common ethical standards from a methodological point of view. So he went to the project was evaluated, he was invited to sign the grant agreement, okay? And then it comes. He goes through the ethical screening, and then he gets a full and detailed report, I don't know, with 3 to 4 pages about on everything that he would have to comply with regarding ethical issues. And of course, he had kind of submitted an idea, a template, a version of what his DMP would be. But he had not submitted the principles in terms of data that he would be using, his approaches, his methods, as part of a reply to the ethics issue. basically because he went through the ethics table and it was like the usual ticking the little boxes to get through with it and submit a proposal. So once he got to the grant agreement's preparation stage, he was asked, he was told that, you did not mention the ethical issues regarding with data and, gathering data and bringing data from third countries, and we want you to do that. And what he was able to do was that, well, this was just we had a conversation and he basically thought, well, this was just, a bit stupid from my part because I really thought about this in terms of data management, what I would be required to do. And so basically what he did was, in what concerned all the data that would be gathered, produced, and how he was going to do everything, he just, kind of reflected that on his ethics reply, and then of course, and a little bit more detail because there were other ethics issues mentioned beyond data. But that part was covered already with the data management plan, okay? So this, for me, I usually tell this story because this for me clearly testifies how you should not think about data management plans as being something completely separate from the ethics clarifications or assessment that you're going to have to provide. Okay, so it is very important, and I think this is a key message to share with our applicants. I think there are still no questions from our participants. So if we don't get a question in 5 seconds, we will end our webinar here because I need your questions to continue. And if not, then we will say goodbye and let you go to do some Christmas shopping. For sure, you need to do. Okay. So no questions yet. Then that's everything from my side. It was a pleasure to have you on that side, and I hope you have found this webinar useful. The recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be available very soon. The video in our YouTube channel, and then, of course, the presentation in a First Society website. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Christmas. Happy holidays for all of you. Thank you so much.